Most of my friends aren't guys. Rarely did my friend groups growing up consist of bros and dudes. I got along better with different kinds of people. Boys were confusing, and men made no sense to me, but I got older and found a couple of good men that eventually became my friends, and soon after meeting one of them, we had a conversation that would shake me to my core. I was talking about how growing up as a boy, being forced to control my emotions was so messed up, and my friend, one of the best men I'd ever known, turned to me and said something about myself that I had never told him, and yet somehow he knew.
Spencer, we can't cry.
Which was pretty jarring, because I had never told him anything about that fact, and yet
We want to, but we actually cannot. That is what they did to us. That is what they took from us and what we can't get back.
I actually had nothing to say. He saw right through me, and every word felt like a confirmation of our mutual suffering. We really can't cry. We really want to and need to, but it's like a skill that we never learned or ever practiced. This is what we were as men, and I'm not even much of a man. I've felt like something else since I was a kid. I had allied myself with anything else because the idea of man just didn't capture what I saw as me. But that doesn't change what everyone else sees. It didn't change how I was raised and who it was that had raised me. When my friend talked about them, those that had made us this way, it was pretty obvious that he meant our fathers. The men that came before us, who were raised by men before them, generations of men that weaved a quilt of masculine culture, handing down generational trauma with every single stitch. Men and masculinity, gender norms and gender roles, they're all social constructs. They're not real, and yet by virtue of their social construction, they affect us. And in this one example, they've left us emotionally castrated. Hurt men raise hurt sons, and hurt sons keep hurting. We were taught through a litany of means to suppress and conceal our feelings under the guise of control and self-discipline. I've always thought myself something akin to a gender abolitionist. I think gender is kind of dumb and limiting. I hate assigning expectations onto people for arbitrary reasons, and I've lived my life openly subverting those expectations for myself, but I don't act like that will overrule all of human nature and society. It's just that this whole man thing was never for me, and I still stand by that. I think it needs to change what it means to be a man. This dominant archetype doesn't work. It makes a trade that isn't worth trading for. Psychologically, the result of all this suppression and hypocritical control is the loss of control altogether. I won't get too dark, but you can look the data up, and it's not pretty. We've seen generations of men consumed by what happens when these feelings build up with nowhere to go. Decades of dangerous and violent outbursts and self-destructive behavior where we catch women and each other in the crossfire. We can't keep doing it like this. The craziest thing is that in this past election, I was surprised to see how conservative men in my generation still were. I thought after seeing what I saw, it would be obvious that we need social change, but consider what these guys have had to contend with. Right along with everyone else, Gen Z men have had to live in the shadow of a housing collapse, a Trump presidency, a global pandemic, a second economic collapse, and the commodification of time through social media and algorithms. All the while, they've had to reckon with their fathers in the past, these old social expectations that place them as some sort of breadwinner in the midst of economies that don't work. These norms were bigger than them and more lasting too. We're talking about a complete shift in manhood in the midst of all this other bullshit. And at this point, I'm not even talking for myself. I knew I wasn't straight or masculine easily by 15. I had already reckoned with it. But the boys that came after me, and the ones who would realize later, they weren't so lucky. So we've seen the rise of the manosphere, the glorification of toxic masculinity. They've been beaten over the heads with Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro, Andrew Tate, Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and a small army of streamers, influencers, and actors with muscles made from exploitation and oxymethylone. We identified a problem without proposing a clear, standard, and actionable solution. We made a power vacuum, and these meninists filled it. Now we're faced with a whole legion of boys destined to repress and hide and shame their feelings away, but this time with inflated online egos, so that way when they do self-destruct, they take others with them. They never stood a chance. Telling women that it's your body and my choice. What do we do? I think the solution is both more simple and more complicated than what I'm about to say, but just follow me for a minute. I'm going to tell you a real story, one that I'm actually proud of. One of the few good stories I have. I used to be a teacher, full-time, with a big classroom of 20 to 30, and I was teaching at the height of Andrew Tate. This absolute fucking crook, one of these hollow, women are bad, money is good kind of online grifters. He knew how algorithms bear fruit, and Christ did he get his squeeze from the young boys that he manipulated. I had one student, a young man in particular, who was deep down his rabbit hole. He'd gone off a few times about so-called bitches and his hatred of women and his love for Andrew Tate, and I tried to put a stop to it when I could. And I tried my best to have these conversations, but I knew at times that my attention was feeding into it, so I let it lie. But this one time, that student asked me, "Mr. Payton, bros or hoes?" He looked to the girls around the classroom, seeking out their attention, and the look I gave back was my usual one of disappointment. I said plainly, "What are you talking about?" Hoping he'd give up, but he continued, "I mean, like who's more important, the bros or the bitches?" Now, I had been wanting to find the magic words to deprogram this kid for months. I wanted to deal with this behavior, but I wasn't this kid's dad. And at this point, the young ladies in the room were looking to me with eyebrows raised and lips pointed, and by some miraculous chance, it all came together, and I knew what I actually wanted to say. So casually and quickly, I looked this young man in the eye, and I simply said, "A real man takes care of everyone." The girls smiled and then glared at him as this young man's face dropped. For the first time ever, in months, he didn't have much more to say. Knowing the situation had been at least diffused, I just repeated as I walked away self-aggrandizingly, "A real man takes care of everyone." Only then just understanding what it is I had said. I told the class I'd tell that story someday, and now I finally have. And I think in that moment, I figured out everything I'd ever need to know about the problem of toxic masculinity. It would never be enough to simply point out that the problem exists. We'd have to empower young men to take ownership of their identities and the men that they would become. And that's what I am proposing today. That as things change and shift, we center manhood or womanhood or whatever hood not as extensions of our genetics and gender roles, and instead as just an aspect of growth and maturity. It's okay to cry. If we don't cry, if we don't take care of ourselves and grant ourselves grace, then we'll never understand what it's like when others need it too. Adulthood, regardless of sex or gender, means taking care of others, and that's something that can't be done if we don't first take care of ourselves. That is what I want to represent to the men of the future, to Generation Alpha and those to come next. That feeling takes courage. That emotions can't be controlled if they aren't first understood, that our realest power is the ability to be there for others, and that it is our responsibility to grow into the kinds of men that those others can rely on when they are in need. That is the thing that isn't being said. That is the unspoken quiet part we have to say more loudly. If you enjoyed this video, please share it with others. Like the video if you did, and get subscribed if you'd like to hear more from me, and take care of yourself.